pro-social volunteer. They work on a suicide prevention helpline. Educated, psychology degree like me, and also studying law. Mystery man number 2. 5'9", brown eyes, black hair, slimmer build, high school diploma, so not as academic, but let's be honest, education doesn't really mean anything in the long term. Doesn't have a lot of friends, but that could be great for your social network. Also, hasn't had a relationship, but that means no one to compare you to, so that could work in your favour. Also, may have a bit of an issue with getting wasted and liking the odd recreational drug, but some would consider that mind expansion. So out of interest, who in the audience would choose mystery man number 2? People are like, if no one else is taking, well, that could be why some relationships that you've had haven't worked out particularly well, because you would be dating Richard Chase. Vampire of Sacramento, best known for ingesting and cannibalising the organs of his victims. Not ideal to take mum and dad on a Sunday. Who would, out of interest, have gone for mystery man number 1? You hugely judgmental audience, you're all liars for a start. You're telling me that if that Tinder profile had turned up and you were like, oh, very educated, oh, very charming, oh, massively empathic, works on a social helpline for people, you would have been like, no, not for me. I know, you're all true crime experts here, so of course the problem is you would still have been dating. Ted Bundy, probably the most notorious serial killer in the world. And the reason I'm posing that question at the beginning of the night is for good reason, because we're going to answer whether it is possible to spot a serial killer living next door to you. And we're starting off with the understanding that it's not that easy to spot these individuals. So, it's one of the reasons why the FBI have created their profiling system. We are going to look at that in a minute, because it's nice and linear, unlike in the UK. And before we do that, I'm going to start with bugbear number 1 for me of the evening.
Oh God, yeah.
Now, I don't know about you, but I cannot imagine what was going on through the mind of the casting director when they were like, we need somebody to play Ted Bundy, you know? We need somebody who's very similar, Zac Efron. Zac Efron. And also, unlike Charlize Theron, where she played Eileen Wuornos and was like, she needs to put on 2 stone, prosthetics on her face, they were like, what do we need to do with Zac? Yellow polo neck. No one will be able to tell the difference. So the logistics of that is the glamorization of serial killers in our media, and particularly with this individual, who we will explore in detail shortly. Let's move on to the FBI profiling system. And the reason we're starting here is, like I said, there's a linearity to it. So unlike in the UK, where there isn't a specific profiling system, it exists in the States. The first 4 themes here are about what your intention is to do when using this. So the first one is that you're going to understand the offender, who is the type of killer that we're looking for. Then, of course, we want to predict their next move, because it's going to prevent other people dying. And then apprehension, interrogation. These are all things that obviously culminate in somebody being incarcerated. So that's how the actual system is meant to work. What I would say is, tonight we're going to look at different theories. I think the criticisms towards this particular system are actually accurate and fair, whereas some of the other ones we're going to look at, maybe not so. So the reason that this gets a lot of criticism is that, first of all, it was only 39 lost killers that got interviewed to create it. So that means they were all male, and that means it's obviously gender specific, but also because it's such a small sample group, it means it's basically quite biased, and the non-random element of that also causes question about its efficacy. So like I said, it's not perfect, it's a good place to start, and it has, with respect to those in the States, brought serial killers to justice. But nonetheless, it's relatively outdated today. But before we kind of explore that in great detail, I actually want to think about what creates the killers. So what we ideally want to do here is look at whether we can fit them into the paradigm of organised or disorganised, right? So that's the beginning place within this profiling system. Am I dealing with an offender who is organised, or am I dealing with an offender who is disorganised? That's their thought process anyway. And we're going to look at that in detail. Before we do, I want to start with my obsession. Those of you who watch me in YouTube, you'll know a lot of the work that I think around and do is about childhood. And people in this room now, lots of you will have completely different lives. But if I was to sit you down and talk about your childhoods, there'll be common experiences that you have, and those common experiences will have eventuated in certain experiences as you move through your years, relationship issues, problems and experiences in life around you, and these are things that are very common because our experiences that affect us early on can have ramifications. Some of you will have had awful parents, and that will mean that you'll have issues more around attachment, for example, or abandonment, or questions about trust. So when we look at our serial killers, there are things we expect to see. And when you consider navigating childhood in the way that we can when we're looking at intervening to stop and deflect these kind of behaviours, understanding the pen portrait of possibility, the things that activate these killers, is so important. Because if we can truly understand what creates them, then obviously we can limit potential by changing outcomes, by understanding what we can do to affect change in those childhoods, shall we say. So let's start with the McDonald triad. The McDonald triad has its critics. If you work in this field, you'll know it. If you're a true crime fanatic, you might have heard of it. But the truth is, for me, when I've seen these three things playing out in the kids' childhoods, then I know that it's a predictor of pretty problematic behaviour down the line. So it's usually a predictor of violent behaviour. The three main key themes here are, first of all, bedwetting. A lot of people will say this is where the criticism of John McDonald, who created it, the psychiatrist who created this particular paradigm, they say, well, people who are abused are also high-level bedwetters. And it's like, that's true, absolutely true. If you're abused as a child, then the chances are you may wet the bed regularly and chronically all the way up until teenagehood. But our killers can be victims too. They are, very often. So, bedwetting. The second one, it's one that everybody in the room will know, is animal torture. And when you think about serial killers like BTK, Dennis Schrader, he had this absolute obsession of hanging animals when he was a young kid. And he would hang them and then revive them by choking, reviving. So you see the way that even as a youngster, the fixation with controlling life and ending life begins early, and then he plays that out in his actual crimes down the line. Then think about the Milwaukee cannibal, Jeffrey Dahmer. Deconstructs the animals' carcasses that he finds and then moves on to killing animals and doing the same, keeps mementos, deconstructs them and holds that connection with the kill. What does he do down the line? We see again that play out. So when I see animal torture and killing in a young person's experience, it really concerns me. It's a big red flag. And then the other one is pyromania. Anybody in here, when they were a kid, like setting fire to things? Like a third of the audience, yes. That's where my obsession with true crime began. I was a massive obsessive of starting fires when I was a little girl. I couldn't be left with a box of matches because I was fixated by the fact I had power and control over lighting things. And that obsession ended when I was about 5 or 6 years old. I was at my uncle's cottage, and not a lot of places to go for a 5 or 6 year old in that situation. Found some matches, hid behind some curtains. Thus ended my career of being interested in fire, because textiles and flammable things don't mix well. Discovered that very, very tragically for myself. What we mean when we're talking about pyromania, though, is somebody like Son of Sam, so David Berkowitz, 1,400 fires in New York, and he was an individual that was so connected with that, his mates called him Pyro, and he introduces us to another, I would say, connection amongst all of our killers that we'll look at this evening, and that is minimization. So this guy didn't like the fact that people knew that he was a serial killer. He didn't like the fact that people were giving him accountability and responsibility for these crimes. So therefore he wanted to minimize his involvement, and minimizing is what our killers do regularly. For him, it was just lying about the fact that he'd killed in psychotic states. He said that the dog next door was telling him to kill people, so he did. And the truth is, he admitted down the line that was all a lie. It was purely because he wanted to be seen as more acceptable. And in fact, that was when he found God. It's another common trait for a lot of serial killers. Apparently they find God quite a lot once they're incarcerated. Not sure what God, but nevertheless, moving on. The other common characteristics that we'll see in childhood, as I said about the chronic bedwetting, is abuse. A lot of our killers, I would say the vast majority, they've been horribly abused in childhood. Sexual, physical, neglectful, emotional. So their foundations have felt very unstable. And when you don't have stable foundations, you can't regulate your experience emotionally. And clearly that can lead to a whole host of internalized issues. Rage, aggression, anger, despair, all of these things. Then we look at drug abuse. Most people in the audience, if not all of you, could probably take drugs without a problem and actually not have that many impacts on you physiologically and on you emotionally. Even high-level dependency, you can get past it and you heal. The brain is incredible, the body is incredible. But if you have these fractures in the foundations that we're talking about, if you exacerbate anything, it's going to amplify this potential. And if you consider that a lot of our killers, they have been drug users, some of them have been chronic dependents, and your brain is developing all the way up until 25, the earlier you impact your brain with these kind of chemicals, the more potential there is for the amplification of those fractures. And then there is something that I think everybody who said they wouldn't have chosen Mystery Man #1 will associate with, which is lying. Excessive lying when it comes down to our killers. So we're not just talking about pathological, which is where obviously there's a classification level towards that. We're talking about these individuals like messing with those around them. They're able to not lie at times, they just wish to, because they can confuse you, disorientate you, manipulate you, they can enjoy it. So we see this excessive lying feature. And then, without a doubt, every serial killer in the history of serial killers has been criminal within their childhoods. Many of them won't have been caught for anything. They'll never have been given a police record, but every single one of them will have been involved in crime. Often it's petty, and then we see it graduate and amplify as they get more intrigued by criminality, obviously graduating to the most macabre of kind of crimes that we're looking at this evening. Now, if you get all of those together,